Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get things kicked off quickly here because the students have lots that they want to share with you, and I want to make sure that we have time for them to give their full presentations and give you all chances to answer any question, have them answer any questions that you have about what they're doing. So I just want to welcome everyone this morning. It's so nice to see everybody out here to support these students. They've worked very hard this summer. This is our third year with the Aspire program, and I'm realizing that there are two things that I really love about this program. There's many things, but two things rise to the top. The first is watching these students develop their own research questions and research project. They each come in, we give them the same exact data set, and then they come and they bring their unique perspective to that data. And I'm always amazed at the range of different things that they end up exploring and how they take just 8 weeks and go from nothing to a fully developed presentation and research project that they're going to share with you. So I know you all are going to love hearing from them this morning, and I've just been very impressed with all of their hard work this summer. The second thing I love about this program is once the students go back to school in the fall and the spring, I get to hear from them throughout the year as they reach out for letters of recommendation and advice about their careers and hearing about what they're going to do next, whether it's going on to graduate school or a first job out of college. It's just wonderful to hear from them all and see all the great things that they do. So I can't wait to hear from you all this fall and spring as you start to think about what's next for you all. I don't want to take up a lot of time because this is really all about you. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for being here. Thank you, students, for showing up and putting your best self forward. It's been a great experience. I'm going to turn it over to Celeste.
Good morning, good morning. It is great to see all of you. I am Celeste Watkins-Hayes. I am the Dean here at the Gerald Ford School of Public Policy at U of M. So welcome to our visitors and guests. So much of higher education depends on relationships between institutions, the ways in which we develop scholars and people who go on to do amazing things in the world, policy leaders, policy makers, activists, community leaders, teachers, lawyers, you name it. There are so many ways in which higher education and the collaboration between institutions really is a showcase of the great work that we are able to do. So this is really about a collaboration between three institutions: the University of Michigan, Spelman College, and Morehouse College. And what we want you to know today is just how much we have been enriched by having these students here. I am a Spelman alum, so the gestation of this program really came from a conversation that I had with Robin and another colleague, Brian Jacob, about the possibility of how do we bring our institutions together? How do we think about collaboration? How do we think about training up the next generation? And I thought of no better place to start other than forming a partnership relationship with my alma mater, Spelman College, and my brother school across the street, Morehouse College. So we are really honored by this, and I want to say to the students, you all have been phenomenal. Please consider us part of your village. The University of Michigan, the Aspire program, everybody that you've met over the summer, everybody who is in this room, we are now officially part of your team. We are part of your village. So we are going to celebrate today, but we know that this is really just the beginning of a long relationship that you will have. Hopefully you'll consider coming back to the university to perhaps get a degree or to become an employee like I did. But nevertheless, just know that U of M, the Ford School, the Aspire program are rooting for you. We are in your corner. We are here to support. And you have honored us with your presence, with your collaborative spirit, with your energy, with your amazing questions, the ways in which we've had opportunities to spend time together. And the word that I would use to describe each of you is inquisitive. the ways in which every time we got together, you had questions and you were taking the conversation in all kinds of important directions to really think about the future for yourselves, to think about the work that's necessary to make the world a better place, to think about the role of research, to think about the role of policy and policy education. It has been an honor to be in conversation with you and your inquisitive minds and your many, many fabulous questions. So I look forward to the future to see what you do. And we are so honored to celebrate today. So I'm going to hand it over to Carrie, who's going to introduce the students and the presentations.
Good morning, everyone. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce each of our wonderful, amazing students. But before I do so, I want to just take one quick moment to thank all of the people who really made this program special. It is something, we do the back end to think about the curriculum and to design the program and to get it set and ready and do the, invite the applications and so on and so forth. But it is this group that is in this room and online that really makes this special. So to our mentors who were here and came alongside the 5 students and worked with them one-on-one, we really want to thank you for your time and all that you did to help make this program so special and meaningful for the students. To our speakers who shared your time and expertise and were there and helped the students open their minds to all the different options that are coming their way. It was really meaningful. And to the family members and friends that are here and online, thank you. Thank you for bringing your great students and being supportive of them in this space. It really is really beautiful. And of course, my fellow YPL staff who also made this happen, and the Ford School staff. Really, it's a group village. It does take a village. So thank you to everyone. And without further ado, Keziah Chapman, I invite you to come on up and share your findings.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Keziah Chapman. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Keziah Chapman. I am a rising senior at Spelman College, majoring in economics with a minor in political science from Dallas, Texas. And I'm just so happy to be a part of this SOAR program. Today, I will be presenting dating violence and suicidal behavior amongst male youth. For me, I am someone who truly enjoys helping other people. I love the smile and fulfillment and the relief that they have just with the additional support. However, because I love to help people so much, it's hard for me to say no. So I wanted to know if you all feel the same. Do you have a hard time saying no? If so, raise your hands. Okay, not alone at all. With that, I also find it hard to establish boundaries, enforce them, and staying true to that. So do you guys also have issues or just trouble with establishing boundaries? Raise your hand as well. Again, not alone. So in that, setting boundaries especially can be difficult for adolescents. Even as adults, we have a hard time, standing up for ourselves, advocating, and saying no. So even for teens who doesn't have that guidance, it's definitely difficult for them to do that as well. With some stats that I done with some literature review, 85% of teens are interested in dating before high school. That's a lot. So middle school and lower, 85% of teens. 36% of teens are in dating relationships by age 13. By age 15, 50% of teens are in dating relationships. And by the age of 17, over 70% of teens have had a dating relationship. The issue. Teen dating violence is often centered for female victims. However, we typically leave out male victims as well. They are definitely important and experience abuse as well. This matters because suicide is the second leading cause of death among adolescents. And teen dating violence is rarely examined as a risk factor for suicidal behavior amongst youth. So within this study, we're going to focus on seeing the association between dating violence and suicidal behavior. and again comparing male and female youth experiences. The way that we are defining teen dating violence is referring to physical, sexual, and psychological or cyber abuse within adolescents, romantic relationships. So teen dating violence can be linked to anxiety, depression, substance abuse, self-harm, and suicidal ideation. There's other risk health behaviors as well, so school bullying, cyberbullying, feelings of sadness and hopelessness, which can also go into alcohol abuse, substance abuse. Also with that, victims of teen dating violence are significantly more likely to attempt suicide, so that's another factor to take account of. And within that, gender matters within the suicidal behavior. However, they are both equally impacted for male and female youth. And girls are more likely to report suicidal ideation, while boys may be less likely to seek help and to act impulsively. Also, research also shows that girls may reduce aggression in late adolescence as it becomes less effective, and boys may also try to gain control in relationships. So further on in the presentation, you'll hear more about how we need to redefine teen dating violence and asking certain questions. And then also addressing teen dating violence earlier on can help with intimate partner violence and dating violence. So there is a study done on college students, how they don't feel prepared or adequate with information to know how to address certain issues that comes up within their romantic relationships. So addressing teen dating violence earlier on can help with that. Questions driving this study: what is the association between experiences of dating violence and suicide attempts among youth? My hypothesis is youth who have experienced dating violence are significantly more likely to report attempting suicide than those who have not. Does the association between dating violence and suicide attempts differ by sex among youth? My hypothesis is male youth who experience dating violence will report higher rates of suicide attempts than female youth. So the data behind the questions: we are using the 2023 Youth Risk Behavior Survey from the CDC, which is a national sample of 9th to 12th grade students. And the key variables that I'm using is teen dating violence, which is my dependent variable, or the predictor in this case, and then my independent variable is suicide attempt, which is my outcome. How I approached to answer my questions, I just ran cross tabulations to explore teen dating violence and suicide attempts by gender. I also did t-tests to make sure that my information is statistically significant, and I also ran regressions to test if suicide predicts teen dating violence. Now getting into the results, which was very interesting and fun to do. So this is the overall analysis of teen dating violence in 2023. So the 90% of youth who reported, did not report dating violence, and then 11% of them did report dating violence. Although it is a small number, it's still very significant as far as emotional and psychological impact. And within that 11%, there's 57% of youth who are female that did report dating violence, and then there's a 43% for males. Now looking at suicide attempts, youth who reported no suicide attempts in 2023, there was 90%. Then we go down to 10% who actually did report suicide attempts in 2023. And of those who reported suicide attempts, 66% of them were female and 34% were male. Now, taking account of female and male youth who have experienced dating violence and seeing who attempted suicide. So 47% of females attempted suicide, whereas 30% of male youth attempted suicide. So again, you're seeing that female youth have higher rates of suicide ideation and teen dating violence. But soon you will see the risk factor that will come into play. It is also important to mention that young men may be more lethal in their suicide attempts, which can contribute to the lower attempt rate, but higher fertility. So this is just the base rates for no dating violence. So students who haven't experienced dating violence, this is what the percentages are for the stages of suicidal behaviors. Consider is just considering suicide. Plan is planning to attempt suicide, suicide attempt, of course they attempt, and hurt is if there's any injury where they need to be treated by a nurse or doctor. So you see the blue is female, orange is male, and again the constant theme of male youth having lower base rates compared to female youth within suicidal behavior. Now these are the base rates for dating violence. So on the left we have female youth, and the higher bars are the impact of dating violence and how that increases their suicide attempts. So for consider female youth with no dating violence already considers suicide 29%, and then adding in the factor of dating violence, it increases to 54%. And then another one I wanted to point out is the attempt factor on both female and male youth. So female, their attempt increases to 40%, and the attempt for male youth is 30%. So although dating violence, well, you can see dating violence has a profound impact on both youth, but it increases the risk of suicidal ideation, planning attempts, and hurt. Now the dating violence impact. So to calculate this, I did dating violence minus no dating violence to show the magnitude between each, to see that dating violence impact. So again, they're relatively close when you look at female and male, but shortly we're about to see like how it changes. Yes, so going into that. So once you do the calculations of difference of dating violence over and no dating violence over no dating violence of the base rate, you'll get like the percent change. And so you see that there's not a big magnitude between the female rates. So when you do the calculations, consider it's a 54% increase when dating violence is involved. Planning a suicide goes up to 113%, attempt to 108%, hurt 33%. And then for males, you can see like the numbers are almost doubled, except for the hurt category. But it goes up to 178% for consider, 200% for plan, attempt, which is 400%, which is definitely interesting to me, so which is why I wanted to focus on the suicide attempts within all, because a 200 increase is interesting, like that's surprising. And then hurt 70%. I will say one thing that for further research, I would hope that the data set can kind of go more into the hurt aspects, or just even like the suicide rates as a whole, to kind of see how that impacts some of the literature of just saying boys have more lethal attempts and methods of suicide. So that was something I had hoped to see something different in. So going back to my hypothesis, the first hypothesis was right as far as teen dating violence having an impact on suicidal behavior amongst youth. However, my hypothesis on male youth having higher attempts than female within suicide is incorrect, but it is still very important to take account of just the risk factors that they have amongst the suicidal behavior. Another limitation I would say is the definition of teen dating violence. This data set describes teen dating violence as just physical, whereas there's other factors that go into teen dating violence. And another perspective is romantic relationships can be different, so how we contextualize violence and who's doing the violence is a little bit more detailed and complex, whereas this is overly simplified. So I think looking more and asking more questions about like the violence, what happened, all of those factors come into play, which could change some of the data that we saw. Future research can also go into adding mediators and moderators, so understanding how depression, hopelessness, substance abuse can impact teen dating violence. And I think it would be cool to see violence within the home, how that impacts teen dating violence. Identifying moderators, seeing how trauma history, mental health, race, and even sexual identity can be another factor within teen dating violence, and how that affects suicide as well. So for educators, I encourage you all to do more research and awareness for teen dating awareness. Doing a simple like teen dating awareness month on YouTube all of it is outdated, like 10, 15 years ago. Even finding the literature, it was very hard to find something current and up to date. So I feel like this is something that's unrecognized, but when you think about intimate partner violence, that's always on someone's mind and people are more aware of it. So I would suggest that. For mental health professionals, I think it will be beneficial to help young males break the stigma around seeking help just because of the social norms that we have on them. They don't want to say when someone is abusing them, feeling like they have to be strong, not wanting to have those conversations. So I think that would be helpful in discussing emotional challenges for them. And then social science researchers and policymakers, just really investing in the resources to look more into this and to see why this is happening. And also trying to implement like preventative measures in schools and communities. Suicide is important and needs to be discussed like mental health, and also looking at all the factors, teen dating violence, substance abuse, and all of those things. And even going back to like, sex ed class, so like having those conversations and really can help students youth become more prepared. And this is my works cited. And I also wanted to say thank you to everyone who poured into us. I truly appreciate it. My mentor, Alvin, he was great in helping me, and Robin and Brian, and just helping with all the data, the YPL, Dean, and also just the guests that we have and speakers. So I appreciate you all. Thank you. Any questions?
I'll kick us off. Thank you for that presentation. That was really fantastic work and troubling at the same time. And one of the things that struck me as we think about interventions is when you consider dating violence, often the focus is on responding to the relationship and then the kind of healing after the relationship, but not necessarily thinking about higher potential suicide risk, I would think. So I wonder if you can talk about intervention and how you think your work might influence or might be helpful to how we think about the necessary interventions around this dynamic, and particularly with the gender aspects of it. Are there unique interventions you would recommend given the gender differences that you saw?
Yes, to start off, great question. I do appreciate that. I do think starting earlier on with addressing teen dating violence can be beneficial, and having those conversations. A unique intervention I would say is having more confidence sessions. I think if people or youth are more confident like who they are in their identity, that would be beneficial to help them understanding who they are and respecting themselves when they're in relationships. As a teen, even as a college student, like still trying to figure out who you are, and you're always evolving, but just having those measures earlier on, I feel like can be beneficial as far as interventions. And also just with social media, I feel like it is idolized to be in a relationship earlier on, and so I feel like having more conversations from trusted adults, mentors, counselors, you don't have to rush. It's okay to like people, feeling your emotions and just learning to build like your emotional tool set, as well as like who you are. And then going more into like sexual identity, adding other hats that we have, I think addressing those as well. But I think youth can have like a particular, maybe one-on-one session with counselors, because everyone is like different, to help them combat all of that. Thank you.
I don't think I need a mic. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
All right. Texas, well done. Fantastic presentation. Can you talk a little bit about your journey in deciding your approach to this research? It is absolutely necessary research, and absolutely there's attention that is needed for young women that are experiencing it, but more so I think young men, as you spoke about, encounter and deal with pride and ego in terms of manhood and what it means to be a man. So can you kind of talk about what lenses you were utilizing while going through this work?
Yeah, thank you for that and giving me the opportunity to touch on that. What first got me interested in like suicide attempts and dating violence was, I believe his name was Twitch, so the dancer producer on Ellen, and how he, took his life, unfortunately. That just stood out to me because I'm like, you would think like everything was okay, and that just happened out of nowhere. And I felt like over time you kept seeing Black men randomly just committing suicide and you never knew why. And also just using the variables that I had in the data set, I just added on dating violence to it just to see. If things were different, I would like to just investigate more for like suicide and Black men. So that was something that took me by surprise. Another thing is too, again, I just know from like talking to my younger sisters or just my peers, that we're all dating. we don't know how to approach it and address it. So with that, I felt like it was important to see how that impacts suicide attempts. Because even youth, again, they're committing suicide a lot. What was another journey that I had? I'm also someone who likes to represent like the underdog. So if anyone's being overlooked, I like to be a voice for them and bring them to the light. So that was another fuel factor for me. And playing with the numbers, again, seeing the percent increase was something that was interesting. So I was like, I think this is something worth investigating and doing more of.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation, and I have a question, and I know that the data set you looked at, right, was 2023, so pretty current.
Yeah.
And we know all of the kind of, social kinds of disruptions that we've had post-2020. And so I'm just curious if you were able to look back at, previous data to see kind of longitudinal trends, and, do you have any indication of whether what we're seeing is higher or lower compared to previous years and generations?
Yeah, compared to previous years, it's higher. It definitely increased. Another reason why this is worth mentioning and doing work on, because there's no intersections. I feel like within the literature, I had to find just teen dating violence and just suicide attempts. So I feel like having more support and help within research can help, track the trends over time. And then another factor, which is worth researching as well, how COVID probably impacted that as well, since we have that time frame. But I would say compared to the literature that I've seen, it definitely increased over time.
Good job. I was curious about the YRBS, that it really only tracks like physical violence.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you think if you were to try to capture in the YRBS, other types of dating violence, like what sorts of questions might you think about asking students to report that?
Yeah, I would include, like the psychological, emotional, even like cyber bullying, some of the other predictors that I showed earlier, and also having follow-up questions, because it's just like yes or no, or just how many times, but not saying like who did it or who was also being the controlling or manipulative person within the relationship. So there are some other factors I would ask, but I know that surveys are long, so I know they try to condense them, but just having the aspect of that perspective.
I have a question as well. Well, great job for one, and two, Dean, that was a great question you asked. I think that that's very devastating for students and youth to go through, but it's important to, how do we combat that before it starts happening? How can we be proactive? So, great question. My question for you is, I know you're focusing on youth, but did you come across any information for adults?
I would say yes and no. More in my literature that I did, seeing that like teen dating violence can either reduce or increase for like college students and for adults. But just with our data set, it just focused strictly on youth, so I just paid more attention to that. And also, again, just, reducing it earlier on, I feel like youth are a little bit more urgent for me compared to adults, because if we stop them now, they don't have to be the adults we have to research about. Thank you all. I appreciate it.
Well, Kazaya, that was great. You definitely got us off on an amazing tone, and thank you all for the fantastic questions as well. So next up, Chloe Fight, I invite you to come up and share your findings.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chloe Fight, and I am a rising junior majoring in economics with a minor in public health from Los Angeles, California. And the title of my presentation today is Coping with Consequences, Behavior as a Key to Understanding Violence, Exposure, and Victimization in High School Students. So, growing up, I saw firsthand how common violence exposure was, and especially in communities where it's often overlooked or not talked about at all. It wasn't until I started volunteering and working with young students that I realized how early and deeply this kind of exposure can show up in behavior. So this past year, I had a moment that really stuck with me. There was a young student who was constantly being labeled as disruptive, bad, or even problematic. So after speaking with her teacher, and after getting to know the student myself, I soon found out that she had been removed from her home and placed into foster care. So this experience really opened my eyes because what looked like misbehavior was just the actual response to trauma. And sadly, this isn't just a one-time thing. This is something that's constantly always happening. So this project matters because reports of sexual violence among high school students are rising, and youth behavior responses to trauma are often misunderstood. And the long-term consequences on mental health, safety, and development are very significant. So before I get into what I found, I'm going to talk about some existing literature. So as I began my literature review, one thing I noticed is that the definition for violence exposure varied across different articles. Some focused on community violence, others focused on physical harm, and some on emotional or verbal abuse. I found that many studies didn't directly link violence exposure to sexual victimization. They talked about more of just risky behaviors, which is substance abuse or early sexual activity instead. Another gap that I found was within sexual identity. Not many studies explored how it might shape a student's experiences of trauma, which was something that was important to me and that I later built into my own analysis. What was consistent, though, was that violence exposure is linked to behavioral responses like depression, anxiety, and acting out. And how a student responds and copes really matters. Which brings me to my research question. My research question states, to what extent does exposure to violence predict the likelihood of experiencing sexual trauma among high school students? And does the type of behavioral response to violence exposure moderate this relationship? So for my project, we used the Youth Risk Behavior Survey from the CDC, which is a national survey done every 2 years among U.S. high school students, including questions about substance abuse, mental health, and violence. The original data set included over 20,000 students, but I narrowed my sample down to 17,761, and I did this with the intention to actually get the ages for high school students. I felt that the age 12 was too young and 18 and plus was just too broad. And I also chose to focus specifically on questions about exposure to violence and sexual violence. So these were my variables. I had my independent variable for sexual trauma. Sorry, it's not showing up here, but it's showing on here. My independent variable was exposure to violence. I had 3 moderators, which were internalizing behaviors, externalizing behaviors, and a resilient student. And then I had controls, which were gender and sexual identities, so I could account how identity might shape these different experiences. Oh, there it is. Okay. So to fully understand the patterns of my data, I had to first decide how I wanted to define exposure to violence. And so while many national definitions often include broad situations like community violence or indirect exposure, I chose to focus solely on interpersonal violence within a home environment. So some of the exposure to violence variables included witnessing fights between adults in the home, being physically hurt by a parent or guardian, or even being put down with assaults. My outcome variable was sexual trauma. The CDC defines sexual violence as sexual activity when consent is not freely given, and some of those variables included being forced into sex, unwanted touching, or even being pressured. My research definition stated sexual trauma is defined as any instance when a student experienced unwanted or coerced sexual acts, and the variables that I used for this were students being physically forced into having sexual intercourse, having anyone do sexual things that they did not want, or being manipulated by someone who was significantly older. And lastly, I know that when students are facing challenging experiences, they all don't respond the same. So I created 3 behavioral variables based on the YRBS data set. I had internalizing behaviors, and these responses reflected how trauma and stress can impact mental and emotional health internally. Second, I had externalizing behaviors, and these responses are typically more visible and may be interpreted as defiance or misconduct. And then lastly, I had defined a group of resilient students. So these were students who still face the same challenging experience, but did not report any internalizing or externalizing behaviors. And this group becomes really important as we look into the data. So my methods. To analyze my research question, I started with the basic regression just to see if there was a relationship between exposure to violence and sexual trauma. Next, I added my interaction terms, which were the behavioral responses of internalizing, externalizing, and a resilient student to see if those different behaviors changed the strength of this relationship. And then I ran separate models by gender and sexual identity to explore whether these patterns look different across these different groups. So this slide shows the main effect of my analysis, which was students who were exposed to violence were 3 times more likely to experience sexual trauma. And so this relationship was statistically significant, which tells us that exposure to violence is highly associated in future risk of victimization. So trauma is often talked about with extreme behavior outcomes, but extreme behavior outcomes isn't always the case. So before taking into account exposure to violence, I wanted to look at how students who had experienced sexual trauma and just how they responded behaviorally. So here we can see that the majority of students, about 85%, showed internalizing behaviors, which were things like feeling sad or hopeless, and this highlighted the emotional toll that trauma can take on a student. Then, at the same time, about 58% of students had externalizing behaviors, and only 9% showed that they were resilient. So this shows us that both silent suffering and acting out are very common ways that students respond to trauma. So now, taking into account when a student has been exposed to violence, this graph shows that students who internalized their trauma had a 13.7 percentage point increase in the likelihood of experiencing sexual trauma. Students who externalized had a 5.2 percentage increase, but what I found the most interesting is the resilient students had nearly a 14-point decrease in their odds of experiencing sexual trauma. So we have just seen how resilient students had much lower odds of experiencing sexual trauma. So why does resilience matter, and what helps build it? So resilience acts as a buffer. It helps interrupt the typical pathway from exposure to violence to victimization. A study titled "Evolving a More Nurturing Society to Prevent ACEs" stated that resilience isn't about just being tough. It's about having supportive relationships, emotional regulation, and a sense of purpose. So resilience can be developed within students. So now I did a graph looking at the variation in impacts by gender. So externalizing behaviors increased for both females and males, and so did internalizing behaviors, but the effect was smaller for boys. Resilience acted as a protective factor for both genders, but it was more protective for girls. Girls who were resilient had around a 14-point decrease in their experiences, in their odds of experiencing sexual trauma. And to me, I thought about, because male trauma is often underreported, or simply that resilience can look different for both females and males. Next, I have the impact by sexual identity. So for both heterosexual and homosexual students, internalizing and externalizing were linked to increasing their odds. But the impact for resilience was different. The effect for homosexual students was lesser than the impact for heterosexual students. And this made me think about how students with marginalized identities may already be building coping skills to navigate the different levels of stress that they encounter, which then strengthens their resilience for facing trauma later on. So some of my major takeaways were exposure to violence significantly increases the risk of sexual trauma. Behavioral responses, especially internalizing ones, are common signs of trauma. Resilience does matter. It can protect students, but it's not always guaranteed. And identity also matters. Gender and sexual identities shape how students experience violence, behavior, and recovery. So why this matters and future implications. Behavior is not the problem, it's just the message. Too often we respond to behavior with punishment instead of simply asking what happened to a student. This research shows that schools and mental health staff need to look at behavior as a possible sign of trauma and not just something to be punished. We also need support systems that are aware of students' identities, especially for LGBTQ+ and female students who may face more risk. Policymakers and researchers can support this by funding identity-aware interventions, evaluating what works, and pushing for policies that center for students' well-being. And lastly, we can't assume that all students are resilient. Schools need to build resilience through trauma-informed and culturally supportive programs. These are my references. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me.
No inside joke. But first of all, fantastic presentation and quality. Y'all are just wonderful human beings and calling attention to these events, to what you said, the people that are dealing with this dating violence and this. That's my other. So I just wanted to ask more about your title here. So behavior as a key to understanding violence exposure. And what your takeaway was really important to me, especially as a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I teach, I'm teaching rising seniors right now, rising high school seniors, and talking with them about their dating life and their interest in dating, and what they expect from a potential partner is really, really important. So I was just wondering if you could talk about, you said one of the maybe implications could be schools developing these programs. Is there something you can think about in terms of how teachers and the relationships teachers have with their students can help build that resilience that is so key in resisting the trauma?
Mm-hmm. Definitely, I feel like relationships are very, very important, especially in the school setting. Something that I thought about was, I feel like often, my mom's a teacher, so I feel like they're often like, you're always writing down or like, when a student is getting in trouble, but instead of like writing down that they're getting in trouble, as soon as they have too many, I guess, like of these behavioral outbursts or instances, then something I thought about were like, they could be like flags, and maybe then they can go talk to the school counselor, or like having implications like that, other than this student is just keeps getting written up for whatever they're doing, like their outbursts or just whatever's going on. And I think having a set of like questions, like to start those conversations between a teacher and student is very important, because I feel like a lot of adults ask us like why we did something when it's not like, it's hard for us to just say why, one, if we don't trust that adult, and two, it's often because of something else. Like you don't know, how that student got to school that morning, what happened at their home. Like there's just so much more than why a student is doing something. So I think just having a set, like maybe even the school can do this, have like set questions to help teachers build and have those open conversations, and then to the way that they're tracking like these outbursts or like these bad behaviors. Instead of like saying that this student is just getting in trouble and always getting written up, like, okay, this student did X, Y, and Z this many times. Now let's, get this student the help. Like send them to a counselor, or if there needs to be outside support or help, then like let's bring that support in so the student can get the help that they need.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Chloe. So this is really interesting to me too. Just my wife is a middle school, so I'm an 8th grade teacher. And kind of building off the question that was just asked, did you get a chance to look at any programs and interventions that have worked? My partner has worked with PBIS, which is Positive Behavior Intervention Strategies, but it's hard to get those things really unless the whole school is kind of on board with supporting it. So there's kind of isolated classrooms that do that, but I'm curious if you also looked into any programs and interventions that helped.
So I didn't look into direct programs, but on that note, like a lot of the literature that wasn't based on like an actual data set or a group of students, and it was just like secondary literature, they really pushed for those type of programs, and just like getting the word out that there needs to be those type of programs in school settings. But also too, something that I thought about is if the violence is happening within the home, how do those programs also help address that, like to make sure that the students' like safety and well-being is still taken into account. But I do know, like you said, a lot of times that it might just be like a classroom or a school, but it's not like public, or like not everybody in a district may be doing it. So I definitely feel like there's programs that exist, but I think it's just ways for like there to be a push out to get those programs across different districts and different schools in general.
Thank you so much for this, Chloe. I wish I had this work when I was working on my book project, because I could have cited this work. My book was on women living with HIV, and many had experiences with childhood sexual trauma. And I wrote about resiliency, but I didn't think to write about the internalized versus the externalized framework, and the way that you laid it out was really, really helpful. And I wonder if you can think about a potential longitudinal aspect to this work, because we know that there might be, I could imagine moments in time where some of the strategies are more internalized, and then other moments in time where they're more externalized, and then other moments in time where resiliency may kick in. So I wonder if you can talk about, within an individual, the kind of movement between those categories. And if you had your druthers, could you imagine doing a research project that would look at that kind of change over time, and how would you think about that kind of longitudinal look at what you've done?
So originally I did want my research question to like kind of grasp the longitudinal aspect, but it just wasn't going to work with the data set. Something that I think, as far as like internalizing, externalizing behaviors, I think they have more risk. Like they do more harm than good. And so when I think of like long-term effects, I think about like how it could develop like psychological disorders or things like that. And something else that I was interested in is how these behaviors can also affect you internally, as far as like more chronic issues. And there was research on that, on how like different ACEs or different things that you're exposed to will like lead to that long term. As far as like tracking it, I'm not really sure, like currently thinking about it, how I would want to like map it out to track it, but I do think that a longitudinal research study would actually be really interesting to look at, because I know that there are longer term effects that like can affect somebody in their adulthood and like forever.
Thank you. Great work.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chloe. That was really wonderful. I'm now going to turn things over. Angelica Pierce, I'll get you set up.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Angelica Pierce, a rising senior at Spelman College. I'm a sociology major with a minor in public health, and today I will be presenting from Adversity to Risk, Understanding and Preventing Teens Who Engage in Risky Sexual Behaviors to Cope with Trauma. So, what are adverse childhood experiences? ACEs are traumatic events that occur during childhood, and many studies have concluded that unresolved trauma as a minor often leads to consequences in terms of relationship building, managing stress, emotional regulation, and health behaviors. Researchers, healthcare providers, schools, and policymakers understand ACEs as scores that are calculated by the amount of time that someone reports specific traumatic events. And for my study, I will specifically be measuring ACEs as parental incarceration, witnessing domestic violence, having verbally abusive parents, and more. Now that I have defined ACEs, I would like to define two other important aspects of my study: risky sexual behaviors and support systems. I define risky sexual behaviors as behaviors associated with sex that may lead to unintended consequences, such as teen pregnancy, using substances before sex, and STIs. I define support systems as a network of trusted and safe individuals who teens can lean on for emotional, educational, and practical support. Having a support system is linked to practicing healthier habits and an overall better well-being. Now I'll share some key background information that is vital for your understanding on the importance of studying ACEs. So many past studies have examined the prevalence of adverse childhood experiences and have linked them to harmful health behaviors, but few have studied the association between ACEs and teen sexual behavior. Research shows that systemic inequities increase the likelihood of ACEs and make it harder for people in their communities to resolve their trauma, and this often leads to generational cycles of poor coping mechanisms. By now, I've hopefully persuaded you to all feel strongly about understanding how ACEs affects teens. I will share a quote from the CDC, which highlights on the importance of studying adverse childhood experiences, making the connection between ACEs and unwanted health outcomes. Preventing ACEs could resolve suicide attempts among high school students by as much as 89%, prescription pain medication misuse by as much as 84%, and persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness by as much as 66%. By studying the association between ACEs and risky sexual behavior, I'm not only exploring a research gap, but I'm evaluating a potential coping mechanism among teens. Thinking about our teenage selves, we can hopefully remember the value of having a trusted mentor, teacher, parent, or friend who made a positive impact on us, steering us to make good decisions, setting us up for a successful future. And thinking about how these support systems can help those teens who are battling with multiple adverse childhood experiences, I am controlling for support systems to tell us how important relationships are with trusting individuals on preventing unsafe sex for teens processing their trauma. With this in mind, I'm led to my two research questions: how do adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, impact teens' sexual behaviors, and what role do support systems play? Looking into my study, as my peers have mentioned, this summer we used the YRBS 2023 Youth Risky Behavior Dataset. This is a CDC-led national longitudinal study that surveys adolescents about health relationships every 2 years. The purpose of this study is to inform schools, community-based programs, researchers, and others on health trends and adolescent behavior over time. There are about 20,000 students in this study, ranging from ages of 12 to 18 years old. Within our large data set, I really focus on 5 main variables. My independent variable was risky sexual behaviors, which looks at whether teens reported using substances before sex and having unprotected sex. My dependent variable was ACEs, which we all know are adverse childhood experiences. As mentioned, my moderating variables are support systems, which tell me how important it is to have parents who can educate their teens on safe sex procedures and friends who can influence teens to practice safe sex. Well, going into a little bit more about my variables, I use substance before sex as my dependent variable, which asks students, did you drink alcohol or use drugs the last time you had sexual intercourse? Condom use asked, did you use a condom the last time you had sexual intercourse? And ACEs was a variable that I generated that categorized students by their ACEs scores. I use parent monitor as a moderating variable that asks students, do parents or guardians usually know where you are and who you are with? Feel close to school asks, do you feel close to people at your school, which was interpreted as, do you have a close group of friends?
Based on previous studies, I created my ACEs variable by combining 8 variables that are related to 8 types of potential childhood trauma. So for example, there on the left side right here, this is a subset of the 8 variables that I use. And on the left side is adverse child experience, and on the right is the representative YRBS variable that was asked to students. So for emotional abuse, students were asked, during your life, how often has a parent or other adult in your home insulted you or put you down? When asking about parent or guardian incarcerated or detained, students were asked, have you ever been separated from a parent or guardian because they went to jail, prison, or detention center? When asking about household substance abuse, students were asked, have you ever lived with a parent or guardian who's having a problem with alcohol or drugs? And then for my analysis, I simplified this by creating a variable called ACEs count, which was created to simplify to asking students from whether they had 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 or more ACEs. ACEs 3 plus was then simplified to represent students with 3 or more ACEs. Going into my analysis, I first conducted descriptive statistics to gain an understanding on the prevalence of ACEs and risky sexual behavior among the sample. I then did some bivariate analyses to note the frequency and association between ACEs and risky sexual behavior. And lastly, I conducted regression analyses to assess how the presence of support systems mediates the relationship between experiencing 3 or more ACEs and engaging in risky sexual behaviors. Going into my results, I'll show this pie chart, which notes the prevalence of ACEs among the entire sample. Roughly half of the sample reported experiencing 0 or 1 ACE, as indicated here in the green and yellow, and the other half of the sample reported having 2 or more ACEs, as indicated here in the blue, purple, and orange colors. Next, these pie charts show the prevalence of risky sexual behaviors among my entire sample. As indicated in the light blue, about 19% of the sample used substances before sex. And then for this other pie chart, about 48% of the sample noted that they did not use a condom the last time they had sex. This really shocked me because this really shows that about 1 in 5 teens used substances before sex, and about half of the sample did not use protected sex. Okay, this bar chart is where I combine the ACEs count with risky sexual behaviors. Those who use substances before sex are shown in blue, and the amount that did not use a condom before sex are shown in yellow. Respondents were then grouped by their ACEs scores of 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4 or more ACEs. Essentially, I've just combined the 3 pie charts I've just showed you all into one graph. Given the upward trend of both of the colors, we know that the likelihood of engaging in risky sexual behaviors increases as the score of your ACEs also increases. Fewer teens also reported using substances before sex than having unprotected sex overall. I would like to note that for the next graph, I'll be focusing on these 2 groups, those with 3 ACEs and 4 or more ACEs, because these students are in more need of having a support system. In this bar chart, I collected the results from my regression analysis test, where I controlled for parental monitoring and feeling close to people at school. As mentioned, these controls were tested for those with 3 or more ACEs and reported that they engaged in risky sexual behaviors. Adding in my controls, I was able to compare the extent to which parents or friends made an impact on teens' willingness to engage in risky sex behaviors. The green indicates that students selected yes for the support system variable, and the purple indicates that no, they do not have a parent monitoring them, or do they have a close group of friends. When looking at statistical significance, I found that parental monitoring does make an impact. Over here, as we can see, teens that had a parent monitoring them and knowing their whereabouts, they were less likely to use substances before sex or use a condom the last time they had sex. Teens who use a condom before, teens who did not use substances before sex were 2 times less likely to when they had a parent monitoring them. While there's only 7% decrease for not using a condom when the teens knew a parent was monitoring them, this is still significant. And this tells me as a researcher that when teens know they have a parent involved in their whereabouts, they are less likely to engage in risky sexual behaviors, especially when it comes to using substances before sex. This finding led me to be curious to know which one of these parents had open conversations with their teens about safe sex, since this variable does not directly tell us this information. When we look at the impacts that a close friend group has on risky sexual behavior, my regression outputs were not statistically significant. This tells me that neither the absence or the presence of having a close group of friends really makes an impact when it comes to protecting against risky sexual behaviors. So what should we do with all these results? I want all of you in the audience and those on Zoom to leave my presentation knowing that parental monitoring matters and support systems matter when it comes to teens processing the adverse child experiences they're currently going through or have gone through. The data supports these three main takeaways. The first being that many teens are struggling to cope with their adverse child experiences, and the amount of those who turn to risky sexual behaviors is very troubling. The responsibility of processing and healing from trauma should not be placed solely on teens, but they should be guided by the help of their schools and communities on healthy coping mechanisms. There's more of a difference when parents are involved in their teens' lives than when we rely on friends to influence each other to practice safe sex. This doesn't mean that I'm all for helicopter parenting, but rather parents having open conversations with their teens. I'd like to end my presentation with a collection of recommendations that I've created aimed for three main audiences: schools, researchers, and policymakers. For schools, I urge them all to expand the sexual education curriculum, ensuring that all students get a well-rounded education. I think they should also create more mentorship programs specifically for those who exhibit concerning behaviors, because as we know, concerning behaviors are often linked to internal struggles. For researchers, we should increase the amount of studies that observe teens who turn to risky sexual behaviors to manage processing their adverse childhood experiences, and policymakers should look into supporting an initiative that protects sexual education among teens. This includes within the school environment and also at home. Here's my references, and I just want to thank you all for having your attention today. Everyone at YPL and my mentor, Jamari Jackson, thank you all for this summer and this great experience. This project not only strengthened my quantitative research skills, but also taught me a lot about how harmful or unfavorable behaviors are often linked to internal struggles. And thank you. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much for that, Angelica. That was great. So it's so interesting in terms of the parental piece. In some ways, there's so much conversation about the importance of peer influence, and I wonder if you can talk more about the parental influence piece, particularly in those teen years, where often, parents will tell you that is one of the busiest times. That's when it's really hard to kind of plug in to what's happening with your kids' lives, and it becomes really about the kind of quality of the time, less so with the quantity, because they're often, doing a variety of things, and the parents are doing a variety of things, whether it's work or activities or school, etc. So I wonder, as you think about the parental piece of this, what advice would you give for how to make those interactions as impactful as possible?
That's a great question. Thank you. I think it's often harmful when we have these overly strict parents, but I think at the same time a balance needs to be found with making sure that your teens know that you're a support system and they can tell you anything, but at the same time letting them make their own decisions, letting them make their own mistakes. So I think that's on the parents to really just make sure that their kids aren't scared to tell them anything. So thank you for that question.
Great job. I'm going to ask a question that came in on chat. So Marietta Daniel Eggles asked, did you notice any specific type of ACEs that were more common among teens who demonstrated risky behaviors?
Okay, that's a really great question, and that's something I would really be interested in. But with the way that my ACEs variable was calculated, I'm not able to see the actual ACE that they reported. I can only see the amount or the number of times that they reported having ACEs, so I can't really look directly into that, but that's something I would be really interested in furthering.
Thanks. Great job. Similar to the dean's question about the parental piece, because I think a big part of why it's hard for parents to get their kids to not be scared to tell them anything is because they have their own set of traumas and anxieties that, make them a little bit less open to the things that their kids are going through. So what types of strategies do you think that they should be engaging in for themselves to kind of work through that so they're able to be more open for their children?
I think that's a great question, and I think that really goes into just talking about breaking the stigma and receiving therapy and just mental health access, especially for our communities of color and those who definitely have that stigma where they don't want to receive help or admit that they have mental health struggles. So thank you for that question.
Great job. I know that you had a strong prior hypothesis that the friendships would really matter and would be maybe a protective factor. So I'm wondering now that you're at the end of this, what your feelings are about that and why you think you found that parental monitoring was more important than having a close group of friends.
That's a good question, and I think it probably has to do with the fact that we can't really look into what types of friends that people have, and also like how strong of influence that these friends are having on people, because some people will be like their friends, other people will steer away from how their friends are. So that was definitely something that I was like surprised to see when we were doing my regressions. So, yeah. Thank you.
It's another great presentation. So thank you very much, Angelica. Brooklyn Vesey, you are next. Vesey, I'm sorry. Thanks for correcting me.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Brooklyn Vesey. I'm a rising junior health science major with a minor in cosmetic chemistry at Spelman College, and I'm so excited to present my research today. I'm also from Detroit, Michigan. I'm very excited to share my presentation with you all today. My presentation is the impacts of parental incarceration on adolescent mental health. I will first be going over my introduction, followed by my literature review, and then going over my research question, and then I will conclude my presentation with the methodology, conclusion, and my recommendations. So, this is my beautiful mom. My mom is my why. My mom and family experiences shaped my interest in this issue. In 1985, my mom's father was incarcerated when she was 4 years old and was not released until she was 13 years old. She often says by the time he was released, she was a completely different child, and it really spoke to her relationship and how her relationship with her father was moving forward. We often had discussions of what it was like for her to grow up without having a father she could depend on when she was younger and needed a father in her life, like not having a father for daddy-daughter dances and not having a father to call on, and how this often impacted her relationships with others and the assumptions they made with how they could treat her. This is this past Father's Day this summer. My grandfather is reincarcerated now, and these are his youngest children. Zara in the back next to me is 10 years old, and Jordan is 8. He was their primary caregiver, and he is now incarcerated. This was their first Father's Day without having their father present. So I wanted to include them in this because they're a huge part of why I chose this topic. So why does this matter? I hope with this presentation, I hope to turn pain into purpose and to consider what we can do to break this cycle. Approximately 52% of state inmates and 63% of federal inmates are parents of children under the age of 18. Millions of children living in the U.S. will have a parent in prison at some point in their lifetime. This is significant because parental incarceration can negatively impact a child's development and have long-term negative effects on their physical, emotional, and social well-being. Incarceration disrupts the family dynamic and creates instability within the household, exacerbating pre-existing family challenges. As mass incarceration increases, so does parental incarceration. The overuse of prison systems causes generational harms and fuels harmful systems and cycles. Having a parent that is incarcerated and criminalized often leads to a child being aware of the stigma and that is associated with parental incarceration, not only for the parent but the household as well. This leads to negative and shameful thoughts and feelings about themselves as well as their parent, and leading to poor mental health outcomes. Children of incarcerated parents are also more likely to be involved in juvenile justice system than children without incarcerated parents. And this also shows that when they get older, they're also more likely to end up back in jail. So that's further continuing the cycle, and even as they go on to have children of their own. So the literature shows that this is a turning point in a child's life and has damaging effects, especially long-term effects into adulthood. The imprisonment of their parent often leads to mental health problems that continue for generations. This is an intergenerational, intersectional, and interinstitutional problem, and it often highlights social inequity and systemic exclusion because of their parent being incarcerated. Parental incarceration is also a unique dimension of ACEs, which is adverse childhood experiences because of the shame and stigma associated with incarceration. So it affects their mental health in a different way than other ACEs would. It also shows that it can lead to so maternal and paternal incarceration can lead to different outcomes for their parent because the mother and father often have different relationships with their child. So I thought it was important to include that gender does matter in this issue, and son and daughters of incarcerated parents may similarly exhibit different behaviors during and after parental incarceration, and also the parent, so like for mothers, the younger their son is when they're incarcerated, the more of an impact it has on them. Also, fathers are incarcerated at a much higher rate, and maternal incarceration has a greater impact on the children of incarcerated parents. So these insights and my lived experience led me to my research question: what is the relationship between parental incarceration and mental health outcomes in adolescence, and how does having a support system moderate this relationship? How does parental incarceration influence the likelihood of adolescents experiencing additional adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs? So first, I'm going to define my key terms. Parental incarceration is the imprisonment or detention of a parent by criminal justice system, or either jail or prison, for a period of time due to criminal charges. And then support system, I define this as an actively engaged or present in the child's life by responding to their needs, showing a genuine interest in their activities and development, so like where they are, and then also having a community in school. ACEs would be a traumatic event that occurred during childhood, so from 0 to 17, that can significantly impact a lifelong physical, mental, and social health, including physical, sexual, and emotional abuse, witnessing violence in the home or community, mental illness, and parental incarceration. So, like my peers have said, we use the YRBS data set, which is a national survey of risky behaviors that is conducted in school for students in 9th grade to 12th grade. So to identify my variables that I used, I looked at variables that relate to parental incarceration, and I limited my data set for mental health concerns and support systems. My dependent variables were mental health outcomes and ACEs. My predictor was parental incarceration and support system. So I created variables, or created an index to assess support systems, created ACEs and mental health outcome, index to assess impact of parental incarceration. And I also want to note that for my variables I created, I only account for if they responded yes to all of the variables I included in the index, and no. So it excludes like the nuance. So it's basically just the excessive of my index. So defining variables, mental health outcomes, I combined binary variables associated with poor mental health to generate overall poor mental health index. So I used suicide, frequent poor mental health, sad, and hopeless. So if they responded yes to this, then it had a higher, they had a higher score for mental health outcomes, and if they responded no, then they were a 0. And then for my support system, I combined the binary variables associated with having a strong and attentive support system. So that would be if their needs are met, if their parent knows where they're at, and how close they feel to their community at school. And then for ACEs, I included forced sexual interactions, assaulted by parent, witnessing violence, and having a parent that has substance abuse and also needs met. I do want to note that I excluded parental incarceration from this index because that's mainly what I'm focusing on, so I didn't want to include that in my ACEs total variable. So among students that without a parent in jail, 39% of them reported feeling sad or hopeless, and then students who had a parent in jail were about 61% likely to report feeling sad or hopeless. So I just wanted to highlight that it was significantly higher for students with a parent in jail. And then this is my second graph. I ran an interaction of mental health outcomes, parent in jail, and support system. 85% showed a likelihood of experiencing mental health issues with support. And I also, because of prior literature showed that gender had a significant impact in those relationships, I separated by gender. So you can see from the graph that females with no support system had higher rates of mental health issues, and then males with no support system also had a higher rate of mental health issues. But I thought it was really interesting that for males, if they did have a support system, it was more of a significant decrease than for girls. So yeah. So I feel like this just really showed that we're able to see like how having a support system acts as a buffer or a protective factor within this relationship. So then I ran a crosstab for adolescents without a parent incarcerated, and most of them had one ACE, while most adolescents with a parent in jail had 2 or more. And I thought this was really significant because most of them only had 1, and these are like traumatic experiences. So it really showed that parental incarceration nearly doubles the amount of experienced ACEs, and I thought this was really significant because it's a lot to like double. And I wanted to really show that how significant it really increases your likelihood of experiencing traumatic experiences by just 1 factor. Limitations of the data set. YRBS does not indicate if maternal or paternal parent is incarcerated and how long the parent is or was incarcerated or the reason for incarceration. And I feel like this could heavily affect the outcomes of this research. So I feel like that would be something I would want to look at, and actually was something I wanted to look at, but the data didn't account for it. And then YRBS data is also self-reported, which may lead to recall bias, so I'm not able to remember or accurately report what they're being asked. And then social desirability bias, even though it is anonymous, I feel that taking surveys in school, you're not going to always answer honestly, especially being around your peers, just worried of being judged, and then misreporting, so not accurately reporting what they're being asked. So my conclusion is there is a strong relationship between parental incarceration and poor mental health outcomes for adolescents. Having a support system improves mental health outcomes, and parental incarceration exacerbates the likelihood of adolescents experiencing additional adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. My call to action. Children with incarcerated parents deserve support and the chance to thrive and be successful in the real world and in life. Despite the choices made by their parents, the data shows that systemic reform is urgently needed to break intergenerational cycles of trauma and incarceration. It's time to implement policies that prioritize healing over punishment. The time to end the cycle is now for these children and for a better future. So my recommendations for research, I think it would be really good to invest in research to improve the understanding of long-term impacts. So during my literature review, I found that it wasn't really long-term, or there wasn't data that really showed the whole lifespan or like how it was when they get older. Of course, I have my mom as a good example, so I see like she's doing great, but I think it would be also really cool to see just how it is for a bigger like example, I guess. And then also looking at the effectiveness of intervention programs and to promote like evidence-based policymaking, so to show policymakers that this is really important and that certain interventions are successful and how we can move forward to really create bigger and better change. So for community, promoting community outreach programs to destigmatize parental incarceration and raise awareness of struggles children with incarcerated parents face with the goal of increasing support. So I think people are often really quick to judge, and my hope is that by having campaigns to destigmatize parental incarceration, they will have sympathy for these families and really be able to be there as a support system instead of judging them and making the stigma and the outcomes of the mental health for the children worse. And they can instead be a part of that support system that makes the statistics better. So for intervention, I think it would be really good to enhance mental health and educational support services for children with incarcerated parents and strengthen visitation and communication programs to foster connection and meaningful conversation, and also invest in child-friendly visitation environments, virtual or in person. I think it would be really good to maintain that connection so that they're not losing their parent. I think a lot of what we see is because that connection is broken, and I think by still having them be active as a parent or be there, be supportive would be really good, and would probably reduce the mental health harms that we currently see in the statistics. And thank you. Thank you. I really quickly want to thank everybody for being here for our presentations, and thank everyone at Youth Policy Lab and at the Ford School for just making this such an insightful summer and being so supportive in all of us and our research questions. And these past 8 weeks have truly been amazing. I really want to give a special thank you to my Spelman sisters and Morehouse brother, because you guys have truly just made these past weeks just so fun. And I'm so thankful for our bond, and there's truly just no other people I would have rather spent these past 8 weeks with, and I'm really excited for the memories we're going to make in the agency, and I love you guys. So. Any questions?
I don't have a question, but I do have a comment. I want to just commend you for bringing your vulnerability into this space. I know in academic spaces that can be really challenging, and so I just want to just acknowledge the courage it took for you to do that, and also just, you wanting to do this work to turn pain into purpose. That's really, really powerful. And as a researcher who often brings her passions to the work, don't lose that, because academic spaces can kind of try to put you in a box. So thank you for sharing with us, and thank you for the really powerful work that you did over the summer. Thank you.
I had another question, just real quick. So with what you've researched here, by the way, again, phenomenal presentation. Just to reiterate Dr. Barber's words, the pain into purpose is something that I integrate in my work as well as a researcher. So, that is what we need to be doing. So thank you for being a model for that. And I wanted to know, have you thought about to further this research or to extend it, thinking about what are the impacts on mental health when the incarcerated parent returns to the fold or returns to the family? Or think about what is the impact of communal support or the village component that we talked about earlier, and how that intends to support the mental health. I think you talked about support and no support, and if that was maybe one of the examples of support that can be extended to the youth. But thank you.
Thank you for your question. I definitely do. I think, especially with my past or with my lived experience this summer, when their father went back to jail, we took them out for Father's Day out to eat, and just being there and supporting them through that. And I think it would be really good to look at how a village is impactful and just to see that data. And I think, was your question two parts? I'm sorry.
No, yeah, it was that, and just, thinking about the village poem. That was my main point.
Yeah. I think a village is really essential, and that's why I wanted to do needs met. I think that accounts for not just if your parent is meeting your needs, but any family member in the household is meeting your needs. So I think that's really important to look at, and I also feel like it would be really good to look at certain communities have a more communal life and way of living. So I think that would be really interesting to look at, and how those just different lifestyles and different communal living really impact that. So yeah.
And just extending the research also, thoughts about that in terms of the parent returning back to the family.
Yeah, I think, so he did return, from my lived experience, he did return to the family, and then he was reincarcerated. So I feel like it does have an impact of like being out the home and then coming back in the home and then leaving the home again, and just that instability within the family dynamic. So I think it really would be interesting to see. That's why I really wish that the data did show like how long and if they were currently incarcerated or not currently incarcerated. I think that would be really interesting to look at, and how that can impact or even like worsen outcomes or improve outcomes. I think that would be something I would definitely be interested to look at. I know for mine, especially the variables that I created, they really were just like yes or no. So I think looking more into those nuances would be really good and really interesting to see.
Thank you.
This was a great presentation. I think this is an incredibly important topic. One question or thing I'd be kind of interested in is like if you've thought about the role of government or public policy in supporting the remaining parent, and like what sorts of things you think could be effective there.
Yeah. That's not something I consider, but I think that's definitely really important to look at. When I was looking mostly at the government and just policy, it was mostly in forms of like mass incarceration and how that impacts different communities, and what there is implemented for visitation and those structures. So I think to offer support to that family, I think that will also go back to the family dynamic and improving that. I think that would be really helpful to offer support, because it is like one parent is being taken out of the household. So in a way, like how when you get divorced and they get put on child support, so they're helping that parent, I think having some type of support to be in place of that, because you're losing an additional parent, I think that would be really helpful and improve outcomes.
Yes, a wonderful presentation. My question for you is, have you, besides like the overarching mental health programs, things like that, have you thought about what specifically could, or what exists already for students who have a parent incarcerated, like in their schools or after school programs? Have you thought like very specifically what could help these students?
So I've seen there are some mentoring programs that offer support mostly for boys that have an incarcerated father. So I think that's probably impactful to have like that paternal figure in the male's life. I think that's really impactful. I think for the most part, I think having that support and then also just maintaining that relationship with the incarcerated parent, I think that would be really beneficial, so they're not losing that connection. I think a lot of what we see is, especially in terms of maternal incarceration, is that that relationship with that parent is just like discarded and they're not able to contact them, or when they are able, it's not like a warm environment where community and those close connections are able to be fostered. So I think just maintaining that connection, I think that's something that's really important. And also destigmatizing parental incarceration, because that also leads to worse mental health outcomes. And I think that's one of the main things that we see is that stigma and that shame that they feel that really makes the mental health outcomes worse.
Brooklyn, this was great work. Thank you so much for it, and really, really powerful. And I wonder, the questions about interventions and just the power of the work is really important. I wonder, on a research question, the gender differences that you saw in terms of the support system and the striking differences there. And I'm still trying to unpack what might be driving that. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about what it would be and where we would go next in the research to understand those stark differences in support on mental health outcomes and the support systems that was so gendered in the dynamic. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for your question. That was actually really shocking to me. I actually thought it was going to be reversed. So I think this also goes back to the misreporting. I think boys are probably less likely to report if they are having mental health issues, just because of the stigma and especially within certain communities around mental health. So I think that would be really like something really interesting to look at. And to also, I would want to go back and look at the missing data from that group and to see what the differences were within reporting for female students and male students, because I think that could answer your question. But also, I think also looking at which parent is incarcerated could also be helpful to looking at that dynamic and why those results showed up the way they did. So I think that would be really interesting to look at. Those are my thoughts when I was looking at the research. So,
I had a question about, does the data have any indication of whether the incarceration led to students being placed into foster care? Because I would think that probably there's a big difference between if you're staying with, a relative or like your community, or whether you're being removed like entirely from the home because of that.
there is a variable that asks if you've been separated from a parent due to incarceration, but it doesn't necessarily state foster care or if you were removed from the home. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you again, Brooklyn. That was great. We have one last presentation. Tyler Matthew will be joining us up here.
Hello everyone, my name is Tyler Matthew. I'm a rising senior sociology major and education minor from Jonesboro, Georgia, and I attend Morehouse College. So, the way I came about this story, as a child, I used to always be so excited to go to school, see my friends, engage with the teachers and everything. And when it was time for report card time, I was so excited to show my parents all the A's and all the E's in elementary school that I earned. However, when it came to my conduct report, I always had a needs improvement score. And I never understood how such a good student can always get in trouble for minor infractions. It wasn't until my time where I was a teacher assistant my first year in college to where I was able to see these bright minds constantly get kicked out of class for minor infractions. And that led to this question here. How does structural racism and disciplinary practices correlate with the educational debt among African American males? So, this is very much story of a cause and effect. So, if students are constantly kicked out of class, that means they're constantly missing instruction time, they're dampening their relationships with teachers, and most importantly, they're getting alienated from the school. This leads to students with more than likely lowering their on-time graduation, lower achievement, and most importantly, dropout rates. And this is very important when we're talking about African American males, when there's already a story painted that they're not going to school and especially furthering their education. Next, I just want to point out the fact that African Americans are 2 to 3 more times likely to get disproportionately racially disciplined than any other race. And lastly, to talk about educational debt, this is the historical, economical, sociopolitical, and moral components that highlights the foregoing school resources that should have been invested in low-income students, which lead to a variety of social problems. It is hard to break the barrier of achievement gaps if there's no proper investment in students in the first place. So here we have my methods and samples. So as you all know, we all were tasked with using the YRBS data set. This happens every 2 years, so we'll more than likely see a data set coming very soon from them this year. And then the questions that I focused on were yes and no questions that was based on the students' experience with racial discipline, racial discrimination, unfair discipline, and grades. So as you can see, I have a few sample groups here. My primary group were African American males from the ages 14 through 18. I really wanted to focus on the high school group, mainly because I have prior experience looking and working with elementary and middle school students. So I really just wanted to see how is this story painting in the higher level of school. I also broke down groups with white males from the ages 14 through 18, indigenous Americans from the ages 14 through 18, multiple Hispanic males and non-Hispanic males, and then lastly, there's a data set of all males from the ages 14 to 18 that are not included African American males. So my variable and approaches. My independent variables was unfair discipline and racial discrimination, the dependent being grades, and my moderators being African American males. The way that I came about this, we're using regressions, crosstabs, and chi-square tests. The regression was very important to really just tell how more likely African American males are being treated when it comes to racial discrimination and unfair discipline. I was able to find that there's actually 8.8 percentage points less likely for African American males to receive good grades when it comes to racial discrimination and unfair discipline. I also used my crosstabs to really look how this scales from all standpoints. So as I mentioned, there's different sample groups. So I was able to use all the sample groups to really just cross-reference what I'm seeing. And then lastly, my chi-square test was just to verify that all my numbers are corrected and significantly significant. So as I mentioned, there was a data set of about 20,000 students. However, when we look at the data set of students that answer the question of being racially discriminated in unfair discipline, we came down to 9,887 students. And this is not included the African American student proportion. We then we first focused on unfair discipline, and now we're looking at racial discrimination. From the numbers significantly dropped from 9,887 to 2,922 students, which is 29% of that large group. From there, we have the 927 students who have experienced both. So as we go down to the numbers, we start to see a significant drop. However, out of the whole data set, 366 students did not receive A's and B's. So I really wanted to include this just to show, although my focus is African American students, there is a gap when it comes to racial discrimination and unfair discipline in the school system as a whole. However, though, when we look at African American males, the first issue, in my opinion, is, as we've seen before, there was 9,000 students. In this sample, there's only 561 students. That's a significant drop already. But out of the sample set that I had of about roughly 1,800 African American males, 561 of them has experienced unfair discipline. And then out of that, 218, and if you see here, there's already a 10% increase of students that have experienced racial discrimination. And same thing can be said for students that have experienced racial discrimination and unfair discipline. And here we have 36 students, or 41%, that did not receive A's and B's. So with this story, I really just want to paint the picture that although we have the large data set and we have my sample size, there's a vast difference when it comes to racial discrimination and unfair discipline for African American students and all students in the graph. So here, as I mentioned, that I was able to compare all the groups one by one and look at how the comparisons may vary. So African American males report the highest average in rates of unfair discipline and racial discrimination, which is a vast score that I wasn't expecting when I was looking at the data set. Racial identity intersects with students' treatment and outcomes in school environments. So as I mentioned, students are often alienated when it comes to this topic. I don't know if y'all remember from y'all time in school, but there's our students that you always see holding the teacher hand or have to go to in-school suspension. All that plays into the students' likelihood to feel safe in school, but as well feels needed in the environment to succeed in the academic space. So when it comes to the literature, what is already known is African American students are disproportionately affected by this issue, but white educators may become more influenced by racial stereotypes linking African American youth to crime. I've seen a video when going through this process of trying to find this topic. There was a study of educators that looked at 4 different students, one of the students being an African American male, and all of their attention throughout the whole video, no matter what they were doing, was the African American student. And then here, just speaking more about the educational debt, I'm sure more of y'all are familiar with the topic achievement gap. The reason why I decided to go with educational debt rather than achievement gap is achievement gap usually positions white students as the standard, and non-white students are compared to them trying to meet the standard. So I really wanted to talk more about the historical and the social political context of African American students currently, rather than trying to compare them to a standard that is pretty much outdated. The students deserve to be seen as just themselves rather than compared to their counterparts. So just talking more about my findings. These estimates in the first graph is looking at the mean differences. So between the samples and other multivariate regressions that I ran that controls both groups, African American males are 8.8 less likely to report A's and B's. They're 7 percentage points more likely to report unfair discipline, and 11 percentage points more likely to report racial discrimination in schools. When looking at the controlling factor of unfair discipline, these students are 6.6 less likely to receive A's and B's in school, 12 percentage points more likely for unfair discipline, and lastly, together as a combined score of racial discrimination and unfair discipline, they're 18 percentage points less likely to getting A's and B's. So as you can see, there's a continuing story of the correlation between grades as well as the racial discrimination and unfair discipline of students. And then looking at the whole data set as a whole, similar to what I was showing with the nested box plots, African American students are only 52% more likely to get A's and B's rather than the full sample as a whole. That's a 20% difference. So when it comes to my limitations, I really just wanted to talk about the limited data. So I know, just like how you know, there's not 1,800 students in the whole nation that are African American males. So just looking at the numbers, there is definitely a need to dig deeper in the African American population when it comes to this issue. I just know from myself experiencing the educational system that I know a lot of my peers who have been affected with this issue and now are currently in the system or still trying to figure out navigating how to come about these issues. Also outdated literature. There's not a lot of researchers really talking about how racial discrimination and unfair discipline really correlate with grades as far as the educational debt piece rather than achievement gap. So really trying to focus and change the narrative to looking at these students as African American students and not trying to set them to the standard of white counterparts. And then lastly, limited context. I'm not sure where these students are really coming from, so it's kind of really hard to graph out and pick out which states really need to probably do more research and policy changes to their rules. So that's one thing that I would look at. Also mentioning school climate. So as I mentioned, the school alienation piece. It's a multi-dimensional compromising their relationships, their values, and the organizational structures in the school. So really just trying to do a better job of the school system really trying to, I guess, incorporate the students better more that are having these issues. So my call of action, like I just mentioned, the school climate effects, trying to find a way to not jump to the fence of going straight to kicking these students out of school, kicking these students out of class. And I think that also just comes with the fact of better preparing teachers for students like with disciplinary issues. And then for policymakers, I would say focus on exclusionary discipline policies. So really looking at a way to, I guess, better prepare school leaders in the school system to help students not get directly into the system. and then turning short-term solutions into long-term equitable outcomes. A lot of my peers mentioned ACEs. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with the school to prison pipeline, but this is something that starts all the way back in the 3rd grade. And as I mentioned, I'm focusing on 14 through 18-year-olds. So if we're talking about a system that starts in the 3rd grade, already painting a narrative on these students, we really need to do a better job of even starting way back then, even if we go to the preschool space or however that may be. But really trying to change the narrative for all students in these spaces. These are my references, and I would just like to thank everyone for this time. You all, whether y'all are mentors, staff, or just guest speakers, y'all have been a great resource to me and my group, and we really thank y'all for this time this summer.
Wondering if the impact of having in-school exposure, detention would improve, you think would have an improvement on the educational gap, or is it, because in that still lies discrimination factor. So do you think except expulsion of in-school detention could improve the problem?
I think the in-school suspension really goes to the piece of school alienation. So the students are still getting disciplined, but I get what you're saying as far as like instead of kicking them out of school completely, giving them in-school suspension piece. But that's definitely something that I would want to further research, seeing the comparisons of out-of-school suspensions and how does that affect their outcomes and in-school suspensions and how that may affect it.
Great presentation. I think my question is about like de-escalation, like with your experience in these classrooms, like how, instead of like even having them removed from the classroom itself, like how can teachers work to de-escalate those situations and also just help it, improve the overall classroom environment?
Yeah, so I spoke more so on the minor infraction piece for my example with probably just excessive talking in class. Little things like that, in my opinion, should not lead to a student getting completely removed from the class or even like in-school suspension. But there are degrees of students where there may be extreme measures of class disruption where there might be excessive backtalk to the teachers or creating issues with students. So I think that more so comes with peer-to-peer modeling, as well as going back to the school resources with mental health solutions, as well as more not school resource officers, but school counselors. I think that that would be a big piece. I know currently they're trying to remove counselors from the school system, but I believe that really helps students just have an extra voice outside of the home.
Thank you so much, Tyler. That was a really great informative presentation. So one of the things that struck me about your talk was the way in which you were engaging the literature, and specifically the framework of the achievement gap versus educational debt. And I wonder if you can talk about that aspect of the work, how you thought about analyzing the literature, the critiques, how you landed on the educational debt framework, why you thought it was, you already talked about why you thought it was a more effective framework than the achievement gap framework. But I wonder if you can talk about your experience in kind of engaging the literature as a key piece of the work that you were doing, because potentially one day, all of you will be part of that literature. So I just wonder if you can talk about that piece of the scholarship.
Yeah, so I wanted to give a huge shout out to my mentor, Chaz. He's the one who actually gave me the article to really look at. I remember when I was going through the brainstorming process of this topic, just really trying to not view this issue from that point of view of black students versus white students. I really wanted to really focus on the debt that African American students are really seeing in the school system. So the way that I came about that really was when I was going through the data set, I started off with just the large group as a whole, and I wasn't really seeing the story that I really wanted to see. So I remember talking to Robin and Jacob and just saying, so how can I focus my group on just African American students? So really just playing with the numbers and playing with the information that was given to us, I was able to more specify what I'm looking for, and that helped when it comes to my literature reviews or trying to find literature that is appropriate for the topic that I'm looking at.
How's it going, man?
Good.
Congratulations on all your guys' presentations. That was very powerful. In your research, kind of on a tangent, did you see policies that were kind of fueling your debt for these black students? Looking at these policies kind of being banks, and they were kind of fueling into certain systems or policies, maybe around zero tolerance or tardiness and absenteeism, how that played into effect on black students, in the sense that, if these things added up, or if you had one or two removed from class, does that now affect you to be removed from school, or now you can't have a certain grade? Did you see anything along those lines?
Yeah, so just knowing what I know about the education system, I did have that background context, but when it came to the literature, no, not really, especially in the last 5-year range, and that's kind of like my issue and why I thought this was important. There's not a lot of policy that's being played into this issue. So I would say moving forward, I hope that policymakers really do open up this issue, because as you said, there are certain things that we know about zero tolerance and everything, but it's not being applied, and this is an issue that's currently feeding into the debt of African American students. All right, thank you guys.
I'm going to ask all of those fire students to come up. You guys, that was amazing. That was amazing. I love to see how this all comes together. I met with almost all of you in the last 2 days, and where your presentations were even 24 hours ago and where they are now. So I love it. So congratulations. And I will just say the one thing that I was struck by all of your presentations. So lots of times when I'm working with graduate students, they do all these statistical analyses and they get to the end and I say, so what? Why? Like why should we care? And I cannot say that about any of you. All of you had a very clear why and a very clear purpose for what you were doing. And so thank you for being so thoughtful about this research and interacting with the data in a way that is going to give us insights into how we can make the world a better place. And I hope that all of you will think about careers and research as you move forward. This was amazing. So we have certificates here just to recognize your accomplishments this summer. So I wanted to just give out those and say congratulations. So, Keziah, congratulations. Angelica, and Brooklyn. We have a reception just down in the Great Hall, so please join us for food and some socializing, more conversations. And Jean.
And Robin, can we just thank you and the whole YPL team and all of the mentors, the graduate student mentors. These folks, the students had graduate students working with them on these projects as well to guide and mentor them. Can everybody involved in the YPL and the Aspire team just raise their hands or stand up just to be recognized? This has been wonderful. Thank you so much. YPL, you rock.
And actually, I will note there are a lot of kudos coming in on Zoom as well. So the way that you all answered your questions, fantastic job. This was really amazing. Excited to see what's next. So you're getting love from everyone.
Thank you on Zoom. We also have thank you cards for Robin and just someone who's been instrumental within our journey. And again, shout out to you all. And we'll talk to you guys in the Great Hall.